So we have Susan Golden. How about this is perfect timing, who's with us today. And before we begin, I'd like to just begin with prayer. Gracious God, we pray this day for peace in our world and all the places where there is war and discord, where there seems to be no hope. Give us the gift of your vision of a new world where we find the ability to settle in to the reality that we're share in this journey of the human family. Help us to find ways to forgive and to build bridges across differences, that we might have peace in our community, in our nation, and our world. Give us the courage, even when others seem not committed to this work, to know that this is our solemn call as your people, to never give up hope, to always find hope in your power and your presence. Amen.
Amen.
Well, what a joy it is to welcome to Christ Church Dr. Susan Golden. She's the director of the Stanford Distinguished Careers Initiative, which is a program that provides a range of opportunities to individuals who are thinking about their life, about reframing their life, about reorganizing life, to find that place of joy and meaning and purpose. With the idea, as I said to some of you before, that the invitation of life is not just to live a long life, but to live all the days of our life. Her career has spanned both the private and public sectors in venture capital and public health. She was a partner at the Schroeder Ventures, specializing in life sciences and healthcare investments, and a partner with the Silicon Valley Social Venture Fund. She's the founder of Golden Health Innovations, where she advises startups, and has served on the board of Dean's Advisors for the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. Again, her work has crossed many sectors, as she has spent time working at Genentech, which she's also served as an assistant professor of public health at Boston University. She did her doctoral work and was an assistant professor at public health at Boston University. She's also has a doctorate in science, at the Harvard School of Public Health, and has done work at Harvard Business School and the management program. It is a great joy to welcome to Christ Church Susan Golden. Susan?
Thank you.
So Susan is going to offer a brief presentation about her work. You don't have to be that brief, because I think that what you have to say is really important. And I hope that what this will allow us to do is to sort of pull back the lens and look at the totality of life, and then we can kind of zero in and really talk about the work that we intend to do with Susan. And just a preview of that, Susan and Christ Church will be working together, building off of her work, Stage Not Age, into a deep dive into what we're calling, using her frame, the Renaissance years, roughly 55 to 85. It begins today with a faith forum, but it will be followed by 5 weekly sessions from October the 18th to November the 15th. And the goal of our work is to move beyond simply having a conversation to moving into deeper work led by Susan for our members. The goal of the deep dive is to facilitate a conversation to think differently about healthy aging, to create opportunities for this community to support each other through new stages of longer lives and redefine purposes and new callings. So Susan, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for being here this morning. I'm really delighted to be here. I've been getting to know Chip and Scotty over Zoom, and it's just really special to see this spectacular place. My profile that Chip read to you had lots of different pieces to it, And that's something I'm going to talk to you about, what it's like to have a portfolio career, to do certain things at one stage of your life and then do different things at different stages of your life. And I wrote a book about some of this, and it's called Stage Not Age, because I found people were defining all of us, the minute you turn 65, into one bucket, that we're frail, elderly, and declining. And the words senior, elder, retiree, all connoted sort of an ending. And instead, I found these years to be the beginning of something totally new, in part because I got to do something extraordinary called the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute. And we're trying to create a smaller version of that here for this community, because I truly feel that being lifelong learners and thinking about new stages and new ways of contributing, even though you've done something maybe the majority of your adult life, is a very exciting, vibrant opportunity. And all this is happening because we're living so much longer than our parents and our grandparents, and our children are going to be living much longer. We were probably all raised, this is probably familiar to you. I'm hoping you all are seeing this on a screen somewhere. Yay, okay. I'm going to put on my glasses because if I'm of a certain age, so I can read my own slides. But we were all raised that we learn, we have that stage, then we earn, and then we retire. And that all made sense when average life expectancy was in the mid-60s. Social Security benefits were based on that assumption, Medicare benefits. Nobody thought you were going to live another 30 years after you retire. And there is no way anybody's going to do nothing for 30 years. And golf and travel are great, but they have its limitations and how much you want that to fill your life. So thinking about a 3-stage life does not make sense if we're all going to be living somewhere into our 90s and 100s right now, and even longer going forward. And this is what's happened in our population. In the 1960s, average life expectancy was almost 30 years shorter than it is today. Women today who are 65 have a good chance of, and good health, are going to live well into their 90s. Average life expectancy for women right now is 87, and for men it's 84. But if you're 65 right now without any serious medical conditions, you have more than a 50% chance living into your 90s. And as you can see, our pyramid, which is how we started out, has become a rectangle because there's now going to be more older people than younger people. And that's a very different paradigm for many things. But this is a major demographic shift happening in the United States and many other Western countries, but our systems are not in place. Our learning has traditionally stopped in your 20s and 30s. That can't last you for a 60-year career span. I went back to school multiple times in the course of my career, most recently at the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute, and that totally enabled me to reset and rethink what I wanted to do with my life priorities. So this is where the stereotype you'll see in many a magazine that you may get in the mail or in marketing materials, that we're all in this stage. We all may get to that stage, but probably not well into our late 80s, early 90s, and maybe never be in that particular stage. But that's how companies have thought about us. That's how society has thought about us. And instead, I want to introduce to you a new way of framing what we're going to be experiencing. There are sort of 3 words, 2 that are in the English vocabulary, 1 that's not yet. And the first one is lifespan, which is the number of years of life you will have. That's what longevity is. But health span is a new concept that we're all really aiming for. How do we live those lives with maximum mobility and ability to contribute? And there's a lot of science going into this. A lot of gadgets are being developed, which will help us to some degree. But we can't just stop at health span. It can't be just the goal to live longer and live healthier. There's got to be joy in those extra years. What are we going to do with those 30 extra years? So a word that I'm trying out these days, and tell me if it resonates for you, is that we also need to have joy span and focus on that. And I have found that in your 60s, and I'm told in your 70s, I'm not quite there yet, that you will have the happiest years of your life based on research that's come out of Harvard most recently. So I want to encourage you to have something to look forward to. We're going to be in our happiest stage. And if we're going to be in our happiest stage, then we have to fill those years with joy. and find the things that bring us joy or that can bring joy to other people. But this is a new way of looking at what people have traditionally described as the elderly or seniorhood. And so joy span is the ability to contribute, to be a continuous learner. I mean, you're going to define your own way, but it's making time for awe. And I happen to think one of the most important things that will bring joy to many people is having intergenerational interactions, intergenerational communities, intergenerational opportunities. And I was so excited to hear that you're going to be building a new center that is going to do just that, bring different generations together, although it's happening in a different way here. But it's something to focus on, like, what will bring you joy in your extra 30 years, and how do you structure your life to do that? So I came up with a new framework. Instead of thinking about a 3-stage life, think about a multi-stage life. And to divide it up, I came up with about 18 different stages we may all go through, not all of them sequentially. Maybe there's more, maybe there's less, but some of them are going to be repeated at different times in our life. So if you can imagine, in our first quarter of life, which is somewhere between 0 and 30, then we have a second quarter, somewhere between 30 to 50, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more what happens. But this third quarter is the one that I think the majority of people right now in this room are, which is somewhere between 55 and 85, and I call that the Renaissance years. And that at some point we're all going to hit our legacy years, where we're starting to think about transitions for end-of-life planning. What do we want our legacy to be? That would be somewhere between 75 to 100 plus. But we need a fifth quarter, because it turns out our children, our grandchildren, are going to live well past 100, the majority of them. And yet right now they're saying 100, 120, 125. So we don't know what that quarter is going to look like. People might be as active as they were in their third quarter. It's something to think about, that this is really different, because more than 50% of children born since 2000 will live well into their hundreds. And that changes the way you think about their education, finances, their housing, their purpose. And those of us who are going to be living longer need to keep going in a very exciting and productive way. So this is all in the book. It's going to be in the materials that if you do the 5-session program, so you don't have to take notes on any of this. But these are just some of the ideas of some of the stages we're going to go through. But one and two of them I want to call out that are going to happen at multiple times in your life that I think are extremely important. One is continuous learning. We learn in our 20s and in our teens. Sometimes we learn in our 30s in formal settings, but that's not going to be enough. You're going to need multiple doses. And moreover, continuous learners have longer lifespans. So that's very important to know. And I think at every quarter of life, we're going to be continuous learners. And those of you who participate in this program will most certainly be. And you can see that it repeats over time. Or it may also be in the fifth quarter. We just don't know yet what that's going to look like. But the other stage that I think impacts virtually everybody in this room is you'll be a caregiver one or more times in your life. Maybe initially for children, and that will impact what you're doing. Then maybe for parents, maybe for a spouse or a friend or a partner. And the Rosalind Carter Institute says that everybody is one of 4 kinds of caregivers. And that Rosalind Carter herself came up with this concept that you are currently a caregiver, you're going to need a caregiver, you will be a caregiver, or you have been a caregiver. It impacts everybody. And the sad thing is, in this country, we really don't have a caregiving infrastructure. I'm sure you're reading about it. There's not enough paid home care providers in this country. So there are 53 million of us who've been unpaid caregivers, 61% of whom are women. Often, like myself, you take career breaks to be a caregiver, and that impacts your life just in terms of your finances, your professional opportunities. It also brings you joy, but it can also bring you heartache, especially if you take care of an aging parent where you don't know what you're doing, and I'll put myself in that category. Even though I had a doctorate and I speak English, I didn't know how to navigate the U.S. healthcare system. Those of you who can, I commend you, but it's complicated. So these are just things to start thinking about, that we're just not in the one bucket. We're in many buckets. And you get to define what those Renaissance years might be like. But I think the Renaissance years is probably the most exciting opportunity we all have, and that I am having at the moment, where you get to reset your life priorities, you rethink, what you might want to do next. It's taking time out to reflect on what's been and where you want to go. And it's a rejuvenation stage. I just call them the R years. And you can add vocabulary to it. This is all my concept, but people are picking up that, thinking about dividing people and thinking about older adults by the stage they're in, not necessarily their age. I'll give you an example. I'm putting together a panel of coming at another institution, and I called one of the companies that I've worked with, and the CEO was in his mid-30s, and I asked him if he could do it on this particular day, and he said, no, I'm running the New York Marathon that day, I'm sorry. And then I called somebody I knew who was in the venture capital business and wanted him on the panel. He said, no, I'm sorry, I'm doing the New York Marathon. One was 35, one was 85. And in my opinion, they are in exactly the same stage of life. One might be running faster than the other, but they're both doing the same thing. And that dispels the myth of that we're all in this bucket, that we're all declining the minute you turn 60 or 65, whatever number you want to choose. And I put this up here just to reinforce caregiving is a stage, but it's also an industry. It's considered a $640 billion industry that all of you in this room could become an entrepreneur around, because I bet all of you have good ideas how to fix caregiving, or a company that might work, or what you might want. I know I am committed to fixing the caregiving situation in the US because I don't want my daughters taking care of me. I'm trying to figure out how do we create systems and communities that support each other in healthy aging, and then have adequate caregiving systems in place, as many other countries do. Singapore does, Denmark does. There's so much to learn from other countries that we could bring into our communities. So I just put that up there because I think it's an important recognition. It's not all perfect as you age. There are going to be some changes in our health status. And so another word that I've made up, and you're going to get to know that I create things, and you'll have to test me if it works for you, is that instead of calling us we're in our elderhood or our seniorhood, why not think about this as our furtherhood? That this is a gift, and we could look forward to it as a new, vibrant period in our lives where we can create new things and contribute to society, and we will have a portfolio lifestyle, whereas I do some teaching, I do some consulting, I work with young companies, and I volunteer. And that mix right now is really wonderful. It's just a little hard when somebody has to introduce me because it goes on and on and on, all the different things you've done. But it's something that you might enjoy thinking about. You might have had one career traditionally, but now you might want a mixture of things. And I went through this program that was so influential for me, that showed me that there could be so much vibrancy as people live longer lives. And I collect photos and stories about people who are doing just wonderful things. And these are the images of older adults that I would like to see more of. People, and when people are marketing, people who clearly look older, but clearly enjoying their lives, and clearly doing, very active things. And the person on the right, I want to tell you a little bit about. He was featured in the Wall Street Journal last August. He's a physician anesthesiologist, and at his hospital, he needed to retire at age 67. That was the mandatory retirement age. And he had to think about what he was going to do next. And he thought about what brought me joy at other times in my life. And he remembered in high school he was a lifeguard at the New Jersey shore. So he trained to be a lifeguard, and he now is the lifeguard at one of the New Jersey shores. And I think it's a wonderful inspiration of other things we could do. I couldn't be a lifeguard, but there are other things I could do that brought me joy at different times, and integrate into your life now. And I think another stage that was introduced to us this past year was by Serena Williams, when she said she's not retiring, she's evolving. She's not in her retirement. She's thinking about evolution as her new stage of life. And I thought that was a wonderful concept of looking forward and going. And the reason I'm making up words is we don't have the vocabulary to describe living to 100, what that means. What does it mean to not retire and do other things? So we have to kind of abandon that word retirement. And there's a book called Unretirement And how do we fill those years with purpose and meaning? And that is part of the program that's being designed here. So this is the article that was in the Wall Street Journal about Dr. Eric Greenwood. And then this was another article that came out this past year that I think is worth reading, and it'll be in the materials that we give you, about here comes the 60-year career span. Most of us thought we were going to have a 40-year career span, somewhere between our 20s and our 60s. But if we're going to live longer, we very well will be working at some point into our 80s, but not consecutively. Everybody's going to need a career break. I took a career break thinking it was going to last for a few years to take care of my young children, and then I would go back. When the youngest goes off to kindergarten, that's often the model. But then I had a widowed elderly mother who started declining. And I didn't know she was going to have lifespan to 91, but she didn't have health span. She was in and out of the hospital all the time. And I was a caregiver. Didn't call myself that. I think like many of you call yourself daughters or sons when you're doing it. But most of us are going to take career breaks. And if you take career breaks, you're going to need to upskill and go back to school and be a continuous learner. And that's why I think that's the two go together very importantly. And that's why I was so fortunate that in 2015, Stanford started a new program where you could come back to the university for a year, take any course anywhere in the campus, and not take the exams. How fun is that, to go back to college and no exams? You have to do the projects and you have to do the reading. And it was the most rejuvenating experience. I call it a drug, because you're in the classroom with people who are 20s and 30s, and particularly the graduate students. And I found that they're in the same stage we were. Our DCI fellows were anywhere from 55 to 85, and we were all rethinking our life purpose, what we wanted to do, what mattered to us. And these friendships formed that to this day. I did the program in 2016. Just last week, I had coffee with one of the students who had been in my class, and she was changing jobs and didn't know what to do next, and she sought me out. And I was hearing about all the ups and downs of her startup company that she had created. These are going to be wonderful opportunities to know people of different generations. And I personally think that's the secret sauce to longevity. Being with younger and older together is a remarkable experience, not just at the Thanksgiving dinner, not just at community services, but working together. There's going to be a 5-generation workforce. I now report into my assistant who took care of things as I was building this program at the DCI, because we've grown the program, it's operational now, and I'm much older than she is, and she's much more tech savvy than I am, and it works beautifully. So it's been a great combination. This is another article, and you're going to now notice in the newspapers every week, in New York Times, local newspapers, Wall Street Journal, the fastest growing segment of this older population is the 85 plus, and that's the fastest growing segment in the workforce as well. So think about that. 85-year-olds, 90-year-olds want to work longer because it brings them purpose, it gives them community, and it enhances their lifespan. We know that. So there's a book that just came out recently that and it's on our reading list that we'll be giving you, but it's the authors of the Harvard study, Robert Waldinger, who have tracked graduates there for over 75 years and looking at their health span, what brought them happiness, and the number one thing that made them happy and extended their life was strong relationships, good relationships with family or friends or community. So you don't need these fancy drugs that they're marketing to you at the moment, although you might want to try some of them. It's investing time in your community, your friends, and your family. And I think that's a real gift to those who are looking for, secret sauce. And he has studied that there's a U-shaped curve to happiness. In your 20s, you're high up there, kind of dips in your 40s, and it goes back up to your 70s. So those of you who aren't quite 70 yet, you have even more happiness to look forward to going forward. These are the Renaissance stages that I've outlined. I'm hoping those of you who take the course may come up with new stages in the Renaissance years, things that'll make you happy. But one of the things I want to introduce to you is another word that is being created out there. I didn't come up with it, and I think it's terrific. It's called olderpreneur. Those of you who are entrepreneurial and you're older, and you might want to design ideas of products and services that you might like or that your kids could use as they get older. And it turns out older entrepreneurs are more successful than younger. We always hear about the young techies, but 55% of the most successful companies have been started by older people, 55 and older. And there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal earlier last week about starting new businesses and how to do it. And so the even better thing to do is not just start it as an olderpreneur, but bring in a youngerpreneur with you. And I know venture funds, that 85-year-old who couldn't do the panel, he only invests in mixed-age startup teams, older and younger, because he thinks there's much greater balance to it. So there's a whole new horizon, and that's what we're trying to get you excited about. So we have designed a 5-session program to take you through how you might think about your Renaissance life, and then how this can become a Renaissance community to support all of you in this very new, exciting stages of life. And that, back to you.
I just want to give applause to that because it's so hopeful. Isn't it so hopeful? Wow. I can remember being with Susan out at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and you take note of all the different speakers and the people that come, but the one that was perhaps the most attended was the one with Susan Golden, because I think everybody is looking to answer these questions of what does it mean for us to live all the days of our life. And Susan, I guess I want to get you to speak to a couple things, but I want you to again hear what she said, that we're going to be working with Susan to create a Renaissance community here at Christ Church. And so we're going to be we're in the startup phase right now. So those of you that get energized around startup, come and see me, because we are through this capital campaign going to be investing in a lot of dollars in order to, in the ministries of the church in particular, this opportunity that we have. And we hope that what the church can continue to be for you is a place of prayer and learning, but a real launch pad into a deeper, more meaningful life. Susan, in our conversations, you said that you think that we're really set up for this, perhaps more so than most places, for a lot of different reasons. And I'd like for you to speak to those things. You've talked about three fundamental building blocks. I want to touch on those, and then I think what I'd like to do is to give people the chance to ask you some questions as well, okay? So we would think of in terms of faith and purpose, but you speak of purpose, you speak of community, and you speak of well-being. So why are those fundamental things that we need to think about as we begin to explore opening our aperture a bit to living a Renaissance life?
Purpose, I think everybody needs at every stage of their life. I don't think you find purpose as much as you create it for, and look for opportunities that fulfill you. But it'll change. Why shouldn't it change in a 100-year life? So your purpose in your 20s could be very different than your purpose in your 40s, your purpose in your 60s, but maybe you go back to that purpose of the 20s and the 70s. I mean, it can shift, but everybody needs that direction, that fulfillment. But you need with a purpose, you need a community to support that. I think that is the hardest part often when people are leaving jobs, is they're losing their institutional identity and their community. And at all times, you're going to need a community to support you. And what excited me so much when you started chatting with me about creating this Renaissance community here is it's here. You don't have to find the people to support each other. There might be different subgroups within this community. There's a term that's used in the senior living space called NORCs, Naturally Occurring Retirement Community. And these are places where, let's say in New York City on the Upper East Side, where there are large apartment buildings, people live together, and the hospital's nearby, and they can get food delivery. They get all the services you might get in an assisted living community, but it's naturally occurring there. And I thought, what if we changed NORC to naturally occurring retirement community, a Renaissance community, excuse me, not retirement. And that's what this is. This is a naturally occurring where you could support each other, create personal advisory boards, I don't know if many of you are familiar with the YPO organization, Young Presidents Organization. In that organization, you have to retire from YPO at 55. Well, that's when things are just getting going. And then they go into something called Gold YPO. But what they have, they told me, is that they have personal advisory boards that help you bounce off ideas what you might want to do next or help you with your networks. And that's something that I think that can be created so specifically here. And then the concept of well-being covers many domains: spiritual well-being, physical, mental, and financial well-being. There's just so many things that we need to attend to, and it shifts over time. But again, this is where a community can support you in those endeavors and in journeys, and nobody can do this alone. And that's what I was so excited about, that this is a community that is looking forward, thinking about how do we support each other, and then how do we help the next generation start planning for their 100-year lives. And I think you can do something quite extraordinary here.
And community, and the gift that we have of 6 generations of community. I mean, speak to that. That's pretty extraordinary.
Well, that's, if intergenerational is the secret sauce to lifespan, you've got it here. And how joyful it is to work with younger. I know a lot of senior living communities that are intentionally being located next to preschools. And then the older adults are teaching, and then they're tutoring other students. So there's so much to be done, but there's also the other direction. You have so much to learn from people of different generations, and not just tech. I mean, the way they're thinking about their future. And there's an organization that we'll talk about in the session, I think it's 3 or 4, called Generations Over Dinner. It's a national movement. It happened at Aspen Institute. It's happening in different communities. We ran it at Stanford this past year, where you invite 6 older adults and 6 people of different generations to just have dinner for an hour and a half, 2 hours, with a theme. It might be about purpose, it might be about the future, it might be about climate. You learn so much, and it is so energizing, and you form new relationships. I can imagine something like that could happen here. We had over 100 people show up when we did our pilot this past spring on campus, and we're launching new ones in residential living communities right on campus in the winter.
Can you go back to, you have the clicker still. Let's go to that slide that talks about the different, and this is still open if you want to jump in, okay?
The different stages?
The different, the classes.
Oh, that was at
Let's see
the
if we
end.
can find that.
Yeah.
So let's just, again, think about this. Reframing aging, financial longevity, joy span, the secret sauce of longevity, and the Renaissance community. So these are the things we're going to be talking about. But again, I want you to see the profound alignment between the things that we're talking about and the things that Susan is talking about. Faith, connection, and well-being. We're thinking about how do we invest in ministries and programs that help people find faith, connection, and well-being. That's ministries as well as spaces. And on October the 22nd, we're going to show you a space that I think you're going to really love, which is going to be a place where we can do lots and lots of learning. But the one thing that I want to just say to each of you, because I really do want to open up the floor for questions, is this is a community that loves you deeply, right where you are, with all the questions, but it's also a community that is going to encourage you, now hang with me, to cultivate a spirituality of risk. Because there is risk involved in doing something new, in stepping out of the comfort zone. But it's not necessarily a spirituality of danger. Do you know the difference? We have to do risky things in order to make progress, in order to have breakthroughs, in order to maybe move from a place of melancholy into a place of joy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's dangerous. It doesn't have to be dangerous, because risky things can be deeply prayerful. Dangerous things are not particularly prayerful, but are just sudden moves without much thinking and without much support. So as we think about this, I think what we can do in a unique way as a church is to do this in the context of prayer, settling in, grounding ourselves in our life with God, opening up our hearts to the questions of vulnerability and meaning and purpose, and getting encouragement when the time is right to take your own leap of faith. Now, some of us remember the journey that we took years ago called Leap of Faith. There's an element in this that involves a leap of faith. And before we talked about the leap of faith, we talked about the faith of the leap. What are the things that we need to set in place? Purpose, community, well-being. But does anybody remember some of the stories of what happened from Leap of Faith? I had someone come to me right afterwards and said, I took my leap of faith. I decided to get married. Very interesting. Another person took a leap of faith and said he'd been thinking about it for a long time and created a inpatient mental health organization here in town. Had another person that took a leap of faith, said that they loved to live at the beach. They'd always dreamed of living at the beach, but never had the courage to make that move, and they decided that that was where they belong, and they moved out of town. Had someone else start a book club for homeless people, I believe her mother continues that in some fashion today. And then there was the most dramatic leap of faith of all of these. Not that we're measuring, but a woman in her 80s came up to me and said, I want you to know I finally did it. It took me a while, but I really prayed about it, and I decided that I needed to do something to bring joy to one of the most difficult places here in Charlotte. So I baked a chocolate cake and took it to the DMV. I don't know whether they ate it or not, but that's a different story. All right, so I want to just, I know this brings forth a lot of questions, so I want to open the floor to some questions that you might have about any of these topics that Susan has raised. Who would like to go first? Yes, sir. Mark. So you could just state your name and ask your question.
Mark Landers.
Here you go. You can hold on to it.
Mark Landers. Susan, could you talk about
I'm sorry. It helps to turn that on. There we go. I apologize. It's my fault.
Could you talk about the work that you've done and seen just how deeply social isolation impacts health?
Did you all hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. He asked a question about social isolation and the impacts on that on health.
So
Test. Can you raise that volume? Ask that question again, Mark.
Yes, Susan.
I heard it.
You heard it, okay.
I heard it.
All right, let's go ahead.
I'll repeat it.
Okay, great.
He's asking a very important question. How does social isolation affect health? And if you have been reading, you know that we have a loneliness epidemic in the United States. And it's been documented by the Surgeon General that it's the equivalent of smoking, the health effects of social isolation and loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It shortens your life, it shortens your health span, it shortens your well-being, it impacts your sleep and your mental health. It's a crisis. I think we can do an awful lot about that by strengthening our bonds to our communities. That is what the Waldinger research has really documented in so many ways. There are efforts throughout the country to try and address the issues of social isolation, and even companies. And I'll give you an example of one, because I think the equivalent of that company is here. It's called Wider Circle. It's based out in Palo Alto area. 2 graduates from Stanford Business School started it because they noticed there were a lot of people who don't want to live in senior living communities, living in their own homes, particularly if they're widowed or divorced. They're living alone, and they're lonely, and they weren't doing much. And they started a company where they pick up these older adults and bring them to group settings and do things. They exercise together, they learn to cook, variety of different things. And it turns out Medicare Advantage became their paying customer. It was in their interest to keep people not socially isolated, to keep them integrated, to help them have community. So much so that this is a phenomenally successful company now. You don't have to create a company around it. You can all do that right here. You can do things together, which I'm sure you're already doing, but even more so, you can partner with different organizations. And to anybody who feels socially isolated, this community could really break that cycle for people by finding different ways to support each other, different interest groups together. That was the greatest gift of doing the DCI program at Stanford. I mean, it was wonderful for my mind, all the courses. I said it was, your brain is on fire, and I often said I took one course each quarter that was not purposeful, it was just for fun. So social dance turns out to be the most popular course at the Stanford campus. So I took a dance course. But being together with people, making new friendships, how often do you make new best friends in your 60s? I did. That doesn't happen all that often. But it does when you are doing things together and supporting each other in that process. So community and social isolation, I think, are the two ends of the spectrum that we're really trying to encourage here.
We got another question here.
I grew up in Naples, Florida, and I waited tables at Maureen's Park, so some of you might even have family there. And I told everybody as a college student, I can't wait to retire, because it was just such a wonderful lifestyle. But the thing is I think I got in a lot of trouble because the baked chicken was getting cold because I was talking to the residents so much when I was waiting tables. And the ability for connectivity between an older generation and a very younger generation, especially when we see the struggles that teens may have with socialization and with media and everything else. What can we start to look at to motivate even more proactive aspects of giving with the older generation that can be so constructive, whether it be teaching, whether it be mentorship? Because I found that growing up to be such a wonderful blessing for myself.
That's great question. There's, again, organizations starting to do this, and we could bring them in-house here to partner with. One is called Encore.org, where they invite you, depending on what career you've had, being a physician or a lawyer or an accountant or a teacher, to a fellowship program, train you how to work in a nonprofit setting with different generations. So they have different organizations that you can work with and put you in there, but you're part of a community, this fellowship. We can create things like that. And there's even a company called Eldera that matches older adults with younger for intergenerational connecting and teaching each other. It's not one way. There is so much to learn from other generations. They have so much to learn from you. Maybe you know a foreign language. You could teach that to the person you're paired with if they're interested, and maybe they're going to teach you how to do woodworking or just any infinite possible combinations. Those are structured ways to do it, but I think this community, given the size, I think you told me 6,500 members, has an opportunity to do it here in many meaningful ways. It could be mentoring, it could be coaching, it could be taking hikes together. We run a hiking group in the DCI program every Friday, and the first Friday of each month, we invite a different student organization or student group just to walk with us. And that is a very casual way, but very purposeful way to get to know each other. You're doing an activity that you both enjoy, you're out in nature, but you're also connecting. And those are some things that you could imagine you could very easily implement here. So there's the more structure to the less structure, but it is so important. And I'm so glad to hear that you enjoyed that experience.
Question here.
Could you speak to the importance of an R that I didn't see up there, reconciliation? I think reconciliation, not doing it, contributes to like a spiritual brittleness. And some ships just have sailed, and my mother's 106, and she has spent the last 16 years or so reconciling those things that she had made up her mind she would never reconcile. And I think that's why she keeps going.
That's a great question.
But I think that's an important R,
Well,
reconciliation.
thank you. You've just contributed to my next chart, my next slide presentation. I will put that up there. That has not been brought to my attention, but I will definitely insert that. I don't have the answer, but it sounds like a perfect practice to include, maybe in particular for your legacy years as well.
Thank you. Question over here. I thought this was the most interesting side of the room. Is that not the case anymore? Other questions? Yes? Okay, we got one, and I'll come back to you, okay? Oh, that's okay. Let me give you the microphone so everybody can benefit from your wisdom.
Hey, I just wanted to find out, can we bring people that aren't in the
Yes.
church and have them sign up?
Yes.
'Cause I have several friends that fall in all these categories.
Absolutely. Bring them on. Thank you for the question. Okay, let's go here, then I'll come to you, okay?
How do we find out about universities locally that may offer these continuing education programs, because we can't all go to Stanford?
So I know Scotty is going to be talking to, is it Queens College or
Yes.
University? Duke has, there are a lot that are online, just so you know. I mean, you don't have to do the Stanford program. There's now 10 universities offering these 1-year or shorter programs around the country, but some of them are actually hybrid and some are all virtual. And a list of those will be included that you can look into. But almost every local community college has a lot of wonderful continuous learning opportunities. And you don't necessarily have to be in the classroom, although that's very delightful, but you can together do a program together. Every Monday night, my husband the continuous learning classes from Stanford, and while we're eating dinner. And then it's a course that just has great guest speakers, no homework, and it's just a wonderful way to learn something new that you're interested in. So I think that Scotty is going to be particularly looking at different local resources for you all to engage with.
Just speak to that. So we are thinking about lots of different relationships that we have and that we can develop across our nation. And so there may be courses that people sign up that are already created. There may be courses that we create, much like this deep dive opportunity. So in many ways, we're going to be crowdsourcing what people are thinking about, and then we'll be working together to build those opportunities. And we'd love to be able to do those things here, but we also like to extend it to the larger community, because there are lots of people who cannot afford continuing education or simply don't have the opportunity. So there's a bit of education equity that's involved in this, to be able to share our rich resources with other people. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. It sounds like you're really making this broad and trying to include, in some ways, as many populations as possible. However, I got to thinking about our granddaughters and what that level of youth, 2.5, 5, and watching what joy they bring to the community, faith community here, and what the community gives back to them. Is there any way that you would involve younger people, even younger than your college students and all of that?
Children.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. It's a great question.
I think that's a perfect connection to nurture. As I said, it could be your grandchildren, or it could be somebody else's grandchildren. Not everybody has grandchildren. And grandparents for hire is a concept. People want grandparents in their lives. So I think we could structure something like that, where we're matching younger with, much younger with older, and for a variety of purposes. And in fact, there's now something called grandparent benefits at some companies that will give you time off, just like some people take child care leaves. You might take a grandparent leave, so you can spend time with grandchildren, which is interesting.
It's great. So I think what is so wonderful about all this thinking, again, is that we're doing it on the foundation of faith, that all of our work is grounded in our faith tradition. And so this is not to replace worship or Christian education, Christian formation, various things that we do to read the text to really figure out what it means to be a Christian in this world. What this is, however, is a way that we begin to think about how to integrate meaning and purpose and vocation and calling, and how we continue to open that question. Oh God, you've given me this great gift. how can I continue to use it? And so let's continue to hold that question. If you find yourself right now having some butterflies in your stomach, and that this is raising some questions for you, consider that a grace. Consider that a real grace. And know that in this community there are people who are living these questions. We live in a community where so much of what we do is, as Susan has said, is tied to our sense of worth. And I think sometimes that can really keep us trapped from kind of moving into this maybe a new stage, when all of a sudden your soul is asking more from you than what your career, or maybe you're coming to the end of the intensive part of the intensive part of child raising. That's always. I wish Dr. Spock wrote a book for after 21, but you know, as they say in parenthood, you never spike the ball, right? You keep moving. But nevertheless, there's still this divine spark that says, maybe I do have more time. And I think life is a gift. And what we do in response to that gift is our gift back to God and to the human community. So I can't tell you how excited I am for this conversation. I want you to know, Susan and I had a conversation online some time back, and I don't think this is going to translate into everybody going back to school, but there was somebody who was in their 60s that called me and said, I just want you to know I've gone back to school. You know, I mean, we can be that kind of generative community that encourages a spirituality of risk and taking chances, and we can support each other along the way. And so, Susan, I can't wait for this experience. I can't wait for our continued conversations as we make investments in this community and in spaces to bring our community together and to invite other people from all over to join us in this journey toward purpose, connection, and well-being. Please join me in thanking Susan Gold for being here with us today. And you're going to go now meet with the leaders? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So she's now going upstairs to M207, 208 to meet with a number of leaders who have agreed to facilitate this first one. So they're leaders that are being trained right now. And if you have questions about this, please see Scotty. Scotty, will you stand? Who's leading this effort? Many thanks to Scotty for leading this effort. All right. Thank you all, everybody. Have a wonderful day.